when to go now.
Okay, go ahead.
This is Brother Cornell West, and it has been my blessing and joy to be in such high quality conversation with Brother Anthony Parker of Keeping It Honest. Make sure you never miss his show.
You can email me. Email address is parkerman2011@gmail.com, parkerman2011@gmail.com. You can text me, leave a voice message. That number is 216-702-3718, 216-702-3718. And if you watch this show on a regular basis, you know we try to do the left side and the right side. And at the end of the day, we let you decide. You may be upset by what you learn, but that's our job, to get you upset. And hopefully you will learn about it. As I told you before, backgrounds in mainstream media. Now I'm doing streaming. And I found a lot of things that are wrong with mainstream. You've heard me talk about it, how they don't get the stories out there. And if your job is in media, no matter what it is, you get all sides out. And we talked about me running for Congress and other parts of the political process. And I've always said, if you don't like who's in office, then either you run or you get some other people to run. But if you don't put any voice in the political process, you've got nothing to say. So, right now we got this big thing going on with Donald Trump in Atlanta and Fannie. So I said to myself, it's very interesting because around the country, I'm still trying to get a bead of what people's take is on this Donald Trump trial. But it seems like the Fannie Lewis thing is kind of mixing in with that. And it's kind of, messing with people's minds so they're not paying attention. So what we're going to do in Parker Twist. You already know Judge McAfee. This young man right here, I'm going to give you his story. So he serves on the board of directors for the National Association of Criminal Defense Attorneys, which is very good. He's been an attorney for civil rights for over 15 years. He has worked and advised with the Reverend Jesse Jackson Jr. I got to ask him about that. That's cool. He's the executive director of the Rainbow Push Coalition's Peachtree Street Project. He hosts a radio show called People, Passion, and Politics on News Talk Radio 1380 AM WAOK. And he is currently running for judge to replace this guy, Judge McAfee. And the most interesting thing I like about this, so if this young man was able to defeat McAfee in this election that's coming up, he would be the presiding judge in this racketeering case, which accuses Trump and 18 others of conspiring to undo President Biden's victory. So you know how they have said that President Biden really didn't get, in office. In Atlanta, he will be possibly the person that will decide that particular case in Atlanta. So this is a big deal, and you got to be a big person to even try this. So I welcome to the program Attorney Robert Patillo. How you doing?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
Did you like the intro?
I do. I'm going to have to use that.
Okay. So now I gave you that big intro. Tell me the pressures for running for judge for this particular position.
Well, it's interesting in our current political season that all political office in the last decade or so has become rather treacherous. That normally a judicial election for a special election in May, our election is May 21st, doesn't get a lot of attention. But because of the nature of our politics now, since I announced about 3 weeks ago, we've gotten death threats. We've gotten people driving in front of our house, yelling obscenities, phone calls, etc. And it really does go to show the tensions within our political system currently, but also the necessity for trying to bring new voices and new faces in. Because if we cower to the mob, if we put ourselves aside and don't really fight against these people or try to put fear and intimidation into our political system, that's how you have democracies fall all around the world. And that's why it's so important right now for everyone to be involved in our political system.
So does it surprise you that because you're running, you're getting death threats?
It's not surprising, but it is disappointing because I tell people all the time on this in this race, there are a lot bigger issues in Fulton County than Fonnie Willis and Donald Trump. There were issues before they came. This case came to be. There'll be issues afterwards. As you mentioned, I practiced for 15 plus years here in Fulton County. Just last year, we had over 10 people die in the Fulton County jail while awaiting trial. We have some people who are sitting in custody for 5, 6, 7 years, just waiting to get in front of a judge. You have people who are awaiting bonds, who are in jail for 6 months or a year, just to get a bond to find out when their court date is. And that's simply put a violation of cruel and unusual punishment, a violation of the Eighth Amendment, and violation of basic human rights. So we have to be working on these bigger issues and not simply make the entire election about Trump.
So then why do you think people are fascinated about this particular trial, the Fannie Willis, because it's Trump?
I think in large part because of Trump, because of the media attention around it. Wherever Trump goes, there's a large amount of media that follows him. Back in 2016, I think he got something like $5 billion in free media just from the news covering him. And it's a first in American history. We have never had a president or former president on trial for multiple felony counts. So of course that's going to draw the attention of the public. But I think what's important is we have to maintain the institutional integrity of the court. John Jay, one of the first Supreme Court justices, made the point that the Supreme Court does not have an army. They do not have enforcement mechanisms. There's nothing that the Supreme Court or any court can do to enforce their judgments other than have the people believe that the court is legitimate. So what is crucial in this case and all others is making sure that we have a justice system that is impartial, where every single person is getting the same manifestation of justice, and that everyone can count on the outcome. Whether you agree or disagree with the outcome, we need to know that it is a fair system that led to that. And that's why I'm running, because I feel that politics has entered this case. I feel that much of this case has now become into question, and we have to have a fresh start, fresh voices, and the opportunity to really have have prosecutors that respect the judges, defense attorneys that respect the judges, and a public that respect the judges also.
So, and it's interesting because it had to go, talk about this case, and it's national, but in a good way, maybe for you, has it showcased maybe even more the problems that are in Atlanta? Because right now, I mean, this is me, maybe other people. The faith in the jury system or the judicial system has been kind of tainted with this, Willis Trump case.
You make a great point, and I think part of the issue is that people pick and choose what they believe in. So for people who are on the left side of the political aisle, if the judge in Florida, Judge Cannon, makes a ruling that's in favor of Trump, they automatically say that's an invalid ruling. The judge is not impartial. This is completely rigged rigged for Trump. Then conversely, if the Judge Chunkin or Judge Erdogan and the other Trump cases, if they rule against Trump, you have everybody who's a pro-Trump person coming out saying this is invalid, this is a kangaroo court, there's no legitimacy to this. And when people lose faith in our system, we see what happens internationally, where you lose faith in the court systems. Now, look at what's going on in Pakistan right now with Imran Khan. You have a situation where people have lost faith in the court system, so they resort to violence in order to settle these disputes. We can't have that happen in America because we are that last shining city on the hill that can show that democracy actually works. So this race is a lot bigger than one single case. This race is in large part about the legitimacy and the sustainability of our system of government, our rule of law. We have to ensure that whether you are a president or a pauper, that you get the exact same treatment in our system. And that's what people are turning out for. That's what people need to vote for.
And with this McAfee ruling, with Fannie, do you believe it was the right ruling? I mean, if you look at it as you just being an individual or you being a lawyer, throughout this, was there reasonable doubt of a conflict of interest? Was it the appearance of reasonable doubt of conflict?
Oh well, I will be one because of judicial canons, but also just for respect to Judge McAfee. I'm not going to criticize his decision. Of course, he
Mhm.
has information the rest of us don't have. He had to talk to witnesses, see discovery. He had a whole lot more than the public had. So I'm not going to second guess his decision. But what I do think we have to look at is this pipeline that exists from the prosecution desk to the judicial bench. Many of the prosecutors in this country end up as a career progression. If they don't become a district attorney, they become judges. And when you have people on the bench who only see things from the perspective of the prosecution side, it's kind of like when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. You only see that side of the situation. In my career, I've had experience as a criminal defense attorney, a civil rights attorney, civil litigation attorney, family law attorney. Everything that you do in law, I've done in law. And that gives me a different perspective on the bench than someone such as Judge McAfee, who's a career prosecutor. So that when we were talking about deference being given, is colored by your experience. When you're talking about ruling on motions, it's colored by your experience and what real world experience you have when it comes to the practice of law. I've mentioned to people on many occasions that if you're going to be a superior court judge with the power to sentence somebody to life in prison or indeed the death penalty, you need to have sat next to somebody as a defense
Mhm.
attorney and know exactly what it means to sentence somebody to 50 years or 100 years or life in prison, how that affects the individual, how that affects their families, how that affects their community for, in some cases, generations to come. If you're going to be deciding on major litigation, civil litigation, where you're talking about hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in question, you should have sat at a table and represented people doing exactly that so that you know the impact that your rulings will have. And this is the real world experiences that I bring to this race versus other individuals that have a more myopic view coming directly from the prosecutor's bench to the judicial desk.
And with McAfee, Judge McAfee, he was appointed. So is that why this is a special election? He was finishing out somebody's term.
Correct. Judge Brasher left the court at the end of 2022, going into the beginning of 2023. Judge McAfee was appointed by Brian Kemp,
Mhm.
the Republican governor of Georgia, to fill this seat. And this is the first chance that the people of Fulton County are going to have to vote on this seat. I think that it's crucial that we have somebody that reflects the voters of Fulton County. I've dedicated my career to civil rights law. I've worked with Reverend Jesse Jackson for over 2 decades, so since I was in college, actually, as a speechwriter, researcher, and then executive director for the Rainbow Push Coalition Peachtree Street Project here in Atlanta. On the other hand, Judge McAfee is a member of the Federalist Society. That's the conservative group that Donald Trump picked most of his Supreme Court justices from, and that they make many of the conservative rulings that fight against civil rights laws and civil rights battles that we've won in the past. I think it's important to have somebody who has represented members in the community here in Atlanta. I've represented churches, I've represented nonprofit organizations, I've represented public officials in proceedings here. I think it's important to have the experience of both defending people and defending Atlanta itself versus simply prosecuting people
Right.
and putting people in jail. So I think this is a contrast election where people can determine exactly what they believe and what they think is important in their judiciary.
And what's the demographics as far as African Americans in Atlanta? But I'm just guessing 90% or.
That if you went back 20 plus years, probably
Mhm.
before the Olympics, so that's 25 years before the '96 Olympics,
Mhm.
that would be close to the demographics. But now it's very much a almost evenly split
Oh wow.
demographics. We're about 52 to 53% African American versus what it used to be. Atlanta is seen as being this chocolate city, but remember,
Right.
this is all of Fulton County. So it's
Okay.
Atlanta, it's Sandy Springs, Johns Creek, all the way up to Milton, Georgia. And
Okay.
then even on the south side, you have South Fulton, Chattahoochee Hills, Palmetto, East Point, Hateville, College Park. And because of gentrification, because of the destruction of public housing in Atlanta, because of the rising price of real estate and housing and apartments, many Black folks have moved outside of the city limits of Atlanta and even outside of Fulton County
Okay.
to suburbs, to places like Clayton County, to places like Decatur where they can afford to live. And because of that, Atlanta has a very different demographics than it used to be.
And so you're running, and are you surprised that some of the things that you want? We're going to talk about your platform in a second. Um, were they, like not easy ideas, but something that any person running could do? And are you surprised it hasn't been done?
Sometimes the low hanging fruit is the fruit that people miss.
Mhm.
I think that when we're talking about issues within the Fulton County judicial system, the issue of wait times is by far the most compelling issue, because during COVID we had this massive backlog which was stuck on top of the already massive backlog that existed. We're going to have judges that are willing to move these cases at a expedited speed. Going back to the Trump case, I think that is outrageous that if a crime is committed in November of 2020, we're sitting here in 2024
Right.
thinking about going to trial. And many people are saying that it might not go to trial until 2025
Right.
at
Yeah.
the earliest. If you look at the Young Thug case, the YSL case, they're saying that case might not go to trial until 2027.
Yeah. I was reading about
That is
that.
a complete miscarriage of justice.
So why are cases and like here's the YSL when they're saying it may not go to trial 2028, 3-4 years from now? I mean, why exactly does that take so long?
The reason is, and this is part of that pipeline from the prosecutor's bench to the judicial bench, that the prosecutors are given entirely too much leeway and deference when it comes to charging and prosecuting cases. I believe that, well, I'll give you a example.
Mhm.
A case gets charged and indicted. Your client is arrested and taken into custody. They're denied bond. So now the first step is getting him a bond. Sometimes it might take 3 or 4 hearings just to get that person a bond, which may take 6 months in order to get them out of custody and back into the real world. And I describe it getting arrested often as like getting abducted by aliens because
Okay.
you're just gone and nobody
Right.
knows where you are at the beginning. Your family, after a day or two, will start checking the hospitals and jails. But in the interim, if you're gone from home for 60 days or 90 days, your job is gone when you get back, your car is repossessed. When you get out, your apartment has been you've been evicted from it. Your stuff been put on the side of the road, picked through, and now it's gone. Your credit score has been destroyed because you haven't paid any bills in 3 months or 6 months. People's lives have been completely ruined for cases that have been dismissed against them, where there were no factual basis, there were no realistic charges against them, but because they were trapped in custody for 60 days or 90 days, or sometimes 6 months waiting just for a bond hearing, their entire lives have been ruined. And it can take a decade or more just to climb back out of that hole. Imagine your credit score suddenly drops from 700 down to about 400 because you didn't pay any bills for 6 months. And you have an eviction on your name, you have a repossession on your name, and now you're unemployed. And when you try to apply for new employment, you have to explain that you lost your last job because you were in jail for 6 months. It's a system that is completely broken. I
And
think
then what if
oh, go ahead.
you're found innocent? You
Yeah,
know.
you're not only sometimes are you found innocent, sometimes the charges are completely dismissed against you once you get to trial. I
Okay.
had a case a few years ago. They arrested a man for possession of crack cocaine. It took 2 years before we even got to discovery. Once we got to discovery, we ordered a lab test on the crack cocaine that was found. It was half an aspirin.
Mhm. Oh,
And he
Jesus.
had stayed in
Wow.
jail for 2.5 years for half an aspirin
So do the
because he
court?
didn't have any money.
How do they make or can they make that up to that person or
They
it's like
never, no, they don't make it up. You can't sue. As you've seen, even cases where someone's wrongfully convicted of murder and they spent
yeah
20 or 30 years in prison, sometimes they might get $500,000 for
okay
30 years of their life. So 2 years of your life, you ain't getting nothing. You're just thrown back onto the streets and hope for the best. But then even after your bond is secured, if your bond is secured, prosecutors can simply come to court and either say, and when the judge says, well, are you ready for trial? They can either say further noticed, meaning they have to get more information, or ask for a continuance and make up a factual basis for a continuance. This sometimes goes on for years because they have such a backlog. They haven't even looked at the case before it's got in front of the judge. So by this time, often People have moved away. They've moved out of the jurisdiction. Yeah. They've started families, all these things, 5 years later, and they have to fly back to Georgia every 3 or 4 months to go to these hearings where absolutely nothing happens, and it continues to pile up. I'm going to have a rule in my courtroom that for prosecutors, you have 3 chances to come in and be ready to go to trial, or the case will be dismissed. Point blank, period. You got to either move the case or the case is going to be dismissed. I'm also going to have a rule for defense counsel. The way you're seeing some of these cases that are in the media currently just getting kicked down the road because of procedural reasons and procedural bases, where you can have a crime from 2020 that can't get indicted and tried by 2024. We're going to have a rule in my courtroom that those cases are going to have to move. We're also going to leverage technology in order to make the system more efficient. Instead of dragging hundreds of people into the courtroom a couple of times a week for plea and arraignment hearings, for example, we're going to go back to some of the COVID rules and do those things over Zoom, do those things virtually, get as much stuff done computerized as possible so we can move these things faster. There has to be a prioritization put on moving cases faster and using every tool available to do so.
And so with the Finney case, and you're looking at the attorneys, I've talked to a lot of people, and the ones who were questioned and everything, I would not want to be represented by any of those, because I think it wasn't the media putting themselves in a bad light; it's the attorneys, and it makes being attorneys, it makes you guys look bad. Why would somebody want to use some of you guys when some attorneys get up there and supposedly have perjured themselves, and these are the ones that you want to represent you?
Well, as I said, just moving beyond the micro of this specific case, we have to look at the macro of this issue multiplied thousands of times over, which is what causes many of these issues in the courts. We have to restore the integrity of our court system. We have to get rid of not just impropriety, but the appearance of impropriety. Many of for the public defenestration of some of the people involved in some of these cases could be done behind closed doors. You can have an in-camera hearing on these issues to preserve the public perception, and then come out with a ruling however you want to rule. I think we have to put the integrity of the court and the public perception of the court at the forefront. I also believe that we've gotten a little bit lax in the way that we treat court now. You'll be in a courtroom today and people will walk in, wearing sandals, house shoes, head rags. I'm not joking. I mean, serious felony cases where your life and your liberty are at stake, and you got on some Hello Kitty pajamas and some slippers on to come to court around it. Well, this is what makes people think that these cases in the court is a joke. I've started seeing lawyers show up in blue jeans and sneakers to court because it's more comfortable. We have to create a court system where people understand the grave responsibility and the grave consequences of what's going on there, and not simply treat it as you're going down to the mall or you're going down to the local McDonald's or something. And this is part of what goes into the role of a judge, is controlling their courtroom, setting the rules necessary, presenting the laws and the facts. It's not simply presiding over and calling balls and strikes. It's about setting the model and the example for how the court will be seen. And if people know that is the standard, people will understand that is the standard, and people will adapt to that standard. The legitimacy and the appearance of the court is crucial to ensuring that people actually believe that the rulings that come out will be fair, that they will be unbiased, and that they will be equal across the board.
And you're watching Keeping It Honest with yours truly, Anthony Parker. We have on the program Mr. Attorney Robert Patillo. So my one question then, after the McAfee situation, did it make you say or think, man, you know what? There's so much going on in this country, and everybody's focused on Atlanta and this judge ruling. Do I want to rethink me getting in office, or do I want to go in office even more?
I think you want to go in office even more. Generally speaking, and we talked earlier about the um, prosecutor to judge pipeline. A big part of that is that a lot of defense attorneys and people who probably would make great judges, they don't want to run. They don't want to participate in the process. You take a massive pay cut from private practice to become a judge. If you are a partner at a law firm, or if you have spent your career really building up your practice, or you do civil litigation, you might make $500,000 or $750,000 a year or more. So those people don't really want to go and become a judge and make $100,000 a year. We have to start ensuring that people realize the importance of public service, the importance of making sacrifices, and the importance that they can serve to the community. You can make all the money that you want, but if your community is decaying behind you, you have to look back and see that it's just not worth it. And when we also talk about representation, we talked about the demographics in Fulton County earlier. It's a slightly majority African American city, Atlanta, or county rather. But if you go to the county jail, almost 80% of the people in there are Black. So when you have,
you've been an attorney. Sorry about that.
Oh no, go ahead.
So why is it that 80% are Black in jail?
It's a litany of issues, but part of it goes to the demographics of the court. I've been in court before where Tyler from Buckhead will come in, and he's been arrested this weekend for DUI, possession of drugs, and possession of a firearm, etc. And then Tyler's dad sends his lawyer in, and Tyler gets a diversion program, and he goes home with a clean record after doing some community service and going to a rehabilitation program. Then Tyrone walks in directly after him. He's been arrested this weekend for DUI, possession of drugs, and possession of a firearm. And now Tyrone is sentenced to 10 years in prison. These are the inequities that exist in our system. And we can either stand on the outside and hope to affect them, or we can work our way into the inside and be able to fix them from the ground up. I have a big focus on diversion programs and leniency, because it's not about giving people a slap on the wrist or just letting them just walk away scot-free. It's about making sure people, and particularly young offenders, have a second chance and have the ability to reform their lives. I think that if somebody goes to prison for 5 years and they come out and do the exact same thing, that's not a personal failure. That's a failure of the system. We need to have programs in place that if you're convicted of a crime, that you have to go through counseling, you have to go through rehabilitation, but also you have to go through educational and jobs programs. You should come out and know how to do pipe fitting, long haul truck driving, HVAC repairs, plumbing, electricians. All these things are stuff that we need in our community. But instead, all the people are doing is you put a 17-year-old into the adult prison, and you leave them there for 5 years. They come out with a bachelor's, a master's, and a PhD in crime. The only thing they learn how to do is be a better criminal when they get out of there, and we have to change that system.
So the way you're saying too, there should be more educational programs while you're in prison.
Correct. Not just educational programs, but also work programs that will give you the information that is necessary to make the changes needed. And if you don't actually invest in making those changes, then you're only going to get the exact same system returning. And
if McAfee or the other guy had finished his term, would you still have considered running?
I actually, when Judge Brasher stepped down from the bench, I considered running then when the seat became available. As I said, we've had issues long before Fonnie Willis and Donald Trump, and I don't think it is constructive to make the entire campaign about one case, one individual, and what's percolating the news, regardless of what happens to Donald Trump. If your grandson or your nephew gets arrested, they're going to have to deal with the system that exists right now.
Right. And so now tell me, how did you become a civil rights attorney?
It's interesting because when I was in college, I was attended a speech by Reverend Jesse Jackson when he was speaking at Georgia State, and after that, I started volunteering for his office here in Atlanta under Janice Mathis. Through that, I met many of the civil rights heroes, everybody from Andrew Young to James Orange, Joseph Lowry, Abernathy, Bernice King, on down the line. And it made me realize the importance of not just being an activist, but of being an attorney. Being able to file the lawsuits, being able to represent communities, being able to use the legal tools. During the 1950s and 60s, the civil rights movement was very much focused around the church because that's where people congregated. So you saw reverends and pastors really being the leaders of that community. If you fast forward to the last decade or so, there really has been the civil rights attorneys leading the charge. People like Ben Crump, people like Lee Merritt, people like a good friend of mine, Chris Stewart and Harry Daniels, who are able to file these lawsuits that are pushing the change necessary. I like to believe that I was on the front end of that. And I think that now the next step is to go from simply being outside filing lawsuits to being inside making the changes necessary.
So how is it now being a civil rights attorney, and you know the history of civil rights? Have we progressed? Do we need, civil rights attorneys now more than back then in the 50s or 60s? Does it surprise you that we need them as much as we have them?
It's more necessary than ever. Primarily because as we've changed laws and then we've made progress, the people who are on the other side have changed their tactics also. If you've noticed, instead of just directly talking about issues of segregation, of voter suppression, etc., now they've turned many of the civil rights laws against African American communities. So if you look at the Supreme Court hearing or Supreme Court ruling last fall on affirmative action, it very much was using the same civil rights laws that were meant to integrate these institutions and said, well, that's reverse discrimination now. So we're outlawing that. If you look at the current attacks that we see on diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, DEI, which has become the new casus belli for conservatives, in large part, they are trying to use the same programs that were increasing African American employment, increasing our representation in corporate America, increasing our access to capital, and now they are using that as a way to push back against the progress we've made. So just as we had to fight the fight in the 60s, the fight continues. They've just simply changed the nature of it and changed. We basically went from boxing to MMA. You're still doing the same thing. It's just a different strategy.
And I have said I don't believe in conspiracy theories, but I kind of believe things are placed the way that they're placed. And the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act of 65, I always felt, I wasn't there, but I always felt that once they got that, maybe the powers that be were in their offices and said, you know what, these African Americans, they're talking too much. They're making a scene. They want something. Let's give them that. I feel that they pacified them because the generation before me that, they got the affirmative action and everything. I don't feel that they came back and came to my generation. I think some of them who were in their 60s, 70s, 80s, they got what they got and they went on. Because to me, why hasn't this civil rights movement been as strong as it was since the 1960s? I mean, to me, it's technically diminished because where you're young, I've run for office a bunch of times, and I never see young people run. Okay, why am I the only one that's going out there feeling, look, I don't like this system. It can't be changed. I tell anybody, if you don't like who's in office, and I've said this to you before, then either you run or you get somebody else to run. I ran for Congress, and when I ran against Max Miller. Okay. So it was big. So it was Max Miller and two other guys. And Max Miller, he came into our community, kind of moved in. Okay. And the other two guys, they were there. And then it was me. And I went door to door, got signatures. Me and my son, I said, look, you help me get these signatures, I'll give you some Jordans. We'll give you some LeBron. So we went, got on the ballot. So there's four of us on the ballot, two guys that have some money, then Trump, who's got millions, and then yours truly. So in one little community, I placed third. Overall, I placed fourth, but I was 7% from placing second. Okay. No money, nothing, going door to door. Did this in COVID, but I wanted to show people that if you don't like who's in office, then you run or get somebody else to run. But to have the support of that, that's sad, and especially sad from African Americans, you know. So to me, when anybody is running for office, I give them credit, and I say, even if you don't win, you may be in a demographic where it's not more African Americans that can vote for you. It may be in a rural area. It may be in an area where people just don't like African Americans. I know this because I run. But then when you have a voice, you have your radio show, your civil rights attorney, do you sometimes, when you're at home thinking, wow, I'm doing all this stuff and I'm doing it for good? Do you ever sit down and maybe don't believe what you're doing?
It's not so much that I don't believe. I think everyone who's involved in activism and involved in trying to create change gets frustrated, as you mentioned, with with the speed of change. I very much was afraid in my youth that I was afraid that I was missing out on all the good fights. All those good fights in the 90s. I figured by 2020, 2024 that those fights wouldn't exist. And I think looking at the rate of progress we've had, we can't deny the progress we've made as a community, as a country, as a people. But we also still have to look at the conditions that we live in and the conditions of many of our communities and see how many people have been left behind and the necessity to continue the fight going forward. If you look at the statistics across the board, if you look at just with your eyes at African American communities nationwide, we see the need for help that exists. And particularly for me in the criminal justice system, there are only so many clients I can represent as a criminal defense attorney to try to bring them equity and justice. But as a judge, you will have the impact on hundreds, if not thousands, of cases. And being able, particularly, to help young people to stay out of a life of crime and make them productive members of society, being able to rescue people who have been locked away for half a decade without ever going to trial, and people who have been in custody for years at a time without a bond. I think that you can make the maximum amount of help from that position. And I think that's why it's important to continuously adapt and make changes as you are working. Don't as the Einstein said, which I mentioned Einstein didn't say, it's just attributed to him. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. We have to keep up and modernize our techniques to continuously evolve with the threats that evolve against us.
And so how important is it for, if you win, the world goes, and if McAfee wins, the world goes?
Well, I think that the crucial nature of this race, as I mentioned, is to ensure that we are maintaining, if not promoting, the legitimacy of the system. I want to ensure that anyone, whether you're on the political left or political right, whether you agree with the ultimate outcome of the case or disagree with the ultimate outcome of the case, that you believe that it was a fair system and that everyone had their due process rights respected, that the people who the state represents were properly represented and had every opportunity to prove their case, and that the defendant has every opportunity to prove themselves innocent in the case. And I think that we have to put in place a system where people truly believe that they are getting a fair shake at justice. And so many people don't believe that now because of what has happened in the past. This is a fight that we have been in, whether people have known it or not. And this is a fight that we have got to win. This is one that we cannot lose, because once you lose the legitimacy of our system of justice, you've lost the system completely.
And so you also do a radio show that I think is kind of interesting too. We have similar backgrounds. Tell me about your radio show.
Absolutely. People, Passion, and Politics on News and Talk 1380 WAOK every Sunday 1 to 4. We are on hiatus right now for the until the election because of equal time rules. You can't have a candidate on air for 3 hours every Sunday campaigning for free on the airways without offering it to the other side, to the opponents also. But we've been on the air for about 10 years now. which is
Okay.
wild to me that it's been that long. But we've had great conversations. We've had amazing guests over the years. We've had Cornell West on. We've had Marianne Williamson on. We've had presidential candidates. We've had entertainers, athletes, political organizers, all across the board. And the most important part of the show is the interaction with the listeners, the conversations that we have. I always say that it's a listener-driven show. It's not just 3 hours of me talking. I actually did an analysis once. Of the 3 hours, I talk about 20 minutes outside of the intro and outro. You do the intro, you set up the show, and then you go to break and come back for break. Other than that, I talk about 20 minutes. The rest of the show is really about the callers and the guests and providing the information to the community. And the same way that I'm able to use the things that I've learned and my knowledge to educate the community through radio, I want to bring that exact same ability to communicate and educate to the bench so that we are working to solve the problems of Fulton County.
And it's interesting too, because my passion is politics, but my passion has also been broadcasting. Because you can get so much out there. And as I said, a politician, all they have to do is do one more thing than the other politician, and you can make a difference. So now, what has been the hardest part about running for you?
Fundraising. Fundraising. I think a lot of us, we have these kind of like wide-eyed ideas of what campaigning is. I'm going to go to the community events. I'm going to go to the old folks' homes. I'm going to go to the churches and talk to the congregations. You spend 90% of your time begging people for money. And that is what modern politics is, because regardless of what your message is, if you don't have 1,000+ yard signs at $5 a sign, if you can't do a round of mailers to 50,000 households, if you can't do phone calls and phone banking, if you can't recruit volunteers to knock on doors and print out the hand cards and the flyers that you need, and put up banners and do web ads and all those things, you're not going to win. And I think one of my opponent in the race already has $100,000 plus in the bank that he's going to be using to flood the system. So we've just been fundraising, $5 and $10 here and there, and trying to put the money together. We only have 45 days until this election. It's coming up on us that quickly. So we're just fundraising like crazy, and we're going to do a really big kick on Get Out the Vote starting May the 1st. So we're fighting our way through it. So yeah, the fundraising part has definitely been the biggest issue.
And then what's been something that has pleasantly surprised you as far as running?
The conversations. I, as you said, we both have backgrounds in radio and broadcasting. I like talking to people. I like hearing their issues and being able to incorporate that into what we're fighting for. Talking to individuals about their experiences in the criminal justice system. Talking to court employees and former court employees about what needs to be done to change the system as it currently is and how we can fix it and modernize it. The more conversations you have, the better outcome you can create. And this is why it's so important for me to really represent the people on the bench, to not be a representative of the state, to not be a representative of the prosecutors, but to be a representative of the people and of the Constitution, and all the things we really believe in, and bringing that to the bench in Fulton County.
And any closing statements real quick?
For me, I really appreciate you inviting me on. I'm glad we could have this conversation. I hope we can do it again in the future. Hopefully I can have you on my radio show also when we come back off of hiatus. But I encourage people to get more involved in local elections. People get really bent out of shape over national elections. Who's the president, who's the senator, who's in Congress. But where the rubber hits the road is state and local politics. And you need to be voting for your state representatives, for your county commissioners, for your aldermen, for your wardsmen, for your and also in these judicial races. Who is the district attorney matters. Who's the solicitor general matters. Who is your judge matters. And I understand that when people are voting, you pull up, you put some money in the meter, you run inside, you flip through the pages. And by the time you get to the judicial races at the back, you're just hitting buttons and hoping for the best. Pay attention to those last pages. I really encourage people also to go to our website to learn more about our campaign, you can go to www.judgepatillo.com. You can make a contribution there. You can sign up for our mailing list to find out about events that are taking place. And also, you can follow us on all social media at Robert Patillo. That's at RobertPatillo for more information on what we got going on in the campaign in general.
All right. Well, thank you.
Hey, when to go now?
Okay. Go ahead.
This is Brother Cornell West, and it has been my blessing and joy to be in such high quality conversation with Brother Anthony Parker of Keeping It Honest. Make sure you never miss his show.